Preparing.
Okay, says we're live, but we're going to confirm, make sure that we're seeing ourselves in Facebook before we get started. Thank you so much for joining anyway.
I think we're good.
We're good. Thank you so much. My name is Adriana. We're here. We have a very important presentation today for the Autism Society. It's about college transitioning, everything, families, and teenagers, and even adults. Many people start college as adults, need to know about college, and um, I'm really honored because we have one person from our team, our executive director, Jackie Benestante, which it's amazing working close to Jackie, seeing everything she does, and also always putting families and autistic adults first. In Jackie is a wealth of knowledge, especially in this topic. I think Jackie could talk about many different topics, but this topic specifically is a topic that Jackie knows so much about. Thank you so much, Jackie, for joining us and for doing this presentation.
Of course. Thanks, Adriana. And I appreciate all the work you do too. So, all right, with that, I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen and we'll go through it. And then we'll have time at the end for questions as well. Let me just make my screen full screen. There we go. Yep. So today we're going to talk about navigating college. Most of this is going to be focused on students with autism, but it also, if you have a kiddo with ADHD or a different disability, a lot of this is the same. So it's probably going to apply in a lot of cases. Also today, I just want to say before we really get started, most of this information is geared towards degree-seeking students. But as many of you probably know, there's more and more opportunities. Almost every year, a new program is added. So there's programs for degree-seeking students with disabilities, but also there's programs at colleges for non-degree seeking students. So there's getting to be more and more really great opportunities. But today I'll mostly focus on the degree seeking programs and what's needed to get into a college or university and how to manage that. All right, here we go. So first, whoops, I'll just say a little more about me. So I'm on recently, I got appointed, I've been on it about a year, but I'm a member of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board's Advisory Council on post-secondary education for persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I'm on the subcommittee that actually looks at college programs, and we did a big look last year. I think that report will be coming out soon if it's not already public, but all the college programs and what are available supports and things like that. I've worked at Autism Society for over 10 years now and done all kinds of programs and public policy and advocacy. And then I also have a lot of experience helping young adults and high schoolers transition to college. So I'm excited to share this because it can be a lot and really very overwhelming. Even if you don't have a kid or a student or you're not a person with this disability, it's kind of a lot to navigate these days. So we really wanted to kind of cover some of these things and hopefully make it easier for you. And then, oh, nope, sorry, I'm having problems with my thing. There we go. So we're going to talk about high school and pre-college, kind of helpful things to know that throw some people off. And those are understanding testing requirements. There's a TSI test I'll talk about next. Just talking about needed skills, kind of managing your to-dos and your task lists, time management, and just using things like Google Calendar or other apps or whatever works for you. But we're going to talk about all of those things, and the importance of kind of trying to get those worked out or start learning those skills if you don't have them. So first we're going to talk about what is TSI. And it's a standardized test. It's Texas Success Initiative. So there's one for English and there's one for math. And the English one covers an essay as well. And you have to either pass this or at least attempt the TSI or submit scores from another standardized test before you can register for any college course for credit. So this trips some people up. You know, you think, oh, no big deal. I'll just go to my local community college. And then you find out you need some kind of test score. So you don't have to have uh, passed the TSI. If you do have other tests, you can submit those, but you have to have something. Otherwise, you cannot register for courses for credit. And I mean nothing like not photography, guitar, nothing for credit can be registered for unless you've passed the English one for most classes or the math for some of the classes. You can take non-credit courses though, developmental courses or certificate courses without having the standard any sort of testing. And so that's a good way for some people to start as well and get used to things, especially if you're going to your local community college. There's some, you know, sometimes there's an actual program for students with disabilities. But you are allowed to retake the TSI as many times as you want to. And there's some free tutoring programs. If you just Google them on YouTube, there's some different things, study programs, or you can buy your own materials if you need to study for that. And we know some students with autism are going to whiz through this test and are great test takers and others are not. So throughout this presentation, I'll be giving you all the information, and obviously people will just take what they need and kind of adapt it to your student or yourself if you're watching. And then on the next slide, we're going to just talk about um, other tests that are accepted. So if you've met the readiness benchmarks on the SAT, the ACT, the STAR English 3 or Algebra 2 end of course exams that you take in high school, those are accepted as well. There's certain benchmarks. A lot of these are on every university website, so you can look and see what are the test cutoffs. Or if you successfully complete a high school prep course, that can also be an alternative to the math or the English TSI test. They're sometimes known as bridge courses. So talk to your counselor because a lot of times your regular English class, they'll just put bridge. They'll just sort of, and I don't know what else they do to it, but it just seems like it's titled that. And I get it's considered college prep. So just talk to your counselor and see what your school is doing if that is something that you need. But it is something you'd have to start at the start of your senior year. And then what are the alternatives to submitting test scores? If your kiddo or your student is not a good test taker, that's okay. Some students are not good test takers. There are developmental courses offered at a lot of community, really, I think all community colleges, and quite a few universities even offer the developmental courses. And what it means, you're taking a non-credit course, often with a paired course for credit. So for math, for example, you might have a double math class. So your student is going to math 4 times a week instead of 2 times. One of the courses is not for credit, the other one is. So you're sort of getting that extra boost. And same with English, it might be a similar scenario. There's different levels depending on how you scored and where they're going to place you. But once you've passed those classes, the developmental courses, and you've passed it, you're allowed to move on and take anything. So if you don't like standardized tests, don't want to do them, you're not good at it, you do have to submit something. That's why I said you have to at least attempt the TSI. You have to submit something. But if you haven't done well on it, it's still okay. And then let's see if we can get to the next page. There we go. And then overall, we'll talk about preparing for the transition to college. So all of these are important skills. And if you can start working on these in high school with some support or with your family or your teacher support, it's good to know and be able to email and communicate with your teachers and professors because it's something you'll have to do in college. It's helpful if you can be willing to accept or seek help, tutoring, or support. And especially in college, it gets harder and faster, and you will probably, some students and some subjects are going to need support services. Living skills, of course, are really important. So you want to prepare for dorm life or increased independence. And that could be, we'll talk a little bit more actually about what some of those things are. And then consider non-negotiables, either for yourself or if you're the parent. What do they absolutely have to be able to do if they're going to go away to college? Is that taking medication, making sure they take a shower, or whatever it is that you think is non-negotiable? start kind of preparing and working on those skills. If they're going to live in the dorm, especially if they're going to share a room, keeping the room clean, knowing how to do laundry, getting to places on time. And those are all good things to practice. And we'll talk a little bit about hacks. And self-advocacy skills are really important. And that just means like making sure you get the notes that you should be getting, or getting your accommodation, or speaking up if something's not working, or you're, going to the disability services office and letting them know, hey, my professor isn't giving me this accommodation. So just having the I guess the confidence to do that is a good skill to work on. And then if you're still in high school or at home, consider trying new technologies. There's so many things out there, screen readers, recording devices, all of those things. And a lot of students are not using those in high school. So it's brand new when you get to college. So if you have any opportunity to even record a TV show, a podcast, anytime you can practice those things or kind of learn how to use them, that's also going to be really helpful. Um, and then here's more kind of things to work on. So it's really important to kind of have a plan. So this is kind of where the executive functioning skills come in, but have a system and kind of try out different things that will work for you. So you're going to have a lot of to-dos, a lot of task lists, and it's good to come up with a system that works for you. So it's a good time to try out different things. Some people really swear by Post-it notes. I know a couple of autistic adults well, and they are like just the master of Post-it notes. Some people prefer a paper calendar, and that's fine if you're diligent about actually having a little book and writing things in it. That can work for you too. There are a lot of calendar apps and Todoist and lists and things like that, so you can kind of explore those. And then sometimes just having an old-fashioned kind of a whiteboard above your desk or your computer, wherever it is, and just write reminders like, here's what I have coming up this week. This is what I need to do. So come up with some sort of strategies and start practicing those. If you have like any therapists, like occupational therapy, ABA, anything like that, that might also be something that they can work on with a student or young adult. And then try to start using what you want. Something like Google Calendar is super helpful because it's easy to use on your app and it's easy to use on the computer. And you can use it for time management and planning and actually block out time. So I would really recommend some students with autism or ADHD or a combination of those things sometimes struggle with that time management and thinking, how long does it take me to get to my class? Do I have to park or am I taking the bus or whatever? And so blocking out that time for getting there, for tasks, for homework can all be really, really helpful. Plus due dates and reminders. And there's apps like Todoist and some other sort of exec functioning planning apps that are super helpful. And I would say explore those and see what you or your student likes. And then if your student lives at home, but you think they're going to live independently or go off to college, kind of start thinking, what can they do independently? Like, if you're the parent, are you prompting them? Are you reminding them to like charge their laptop, take their laptop to school, or pack their backpack? Like little things that sometimes parents get in the habit of doing that you don't realize. Kind of try to start transferring some of those things over to your students so that they can be independent and not be kind of floundering when they go to college. Um, and then we're just going to kind of talk about different things and what to expect from high school versus college because it is very, very different. And there's a lot of misconceptions about this. So this chart is actually from the Organization for Autism Research. And the link's at the bottom, but if you Google that and put college transition, you'll find a lot of good resources, but I'll kind of review some of these. So high school, high school is governed by the Individuals with Disabilities and Education Act. That guarantees our kids sort of like special education. It's an entitlement. In college, post-secondary education is governed by Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. and the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it's a little bit different. There's not actually IDEA and there's not IEPs in college, which a lot of people think there are, or they're calling it that, but it's not an actual IEP. And then entitlement law, as you can see, it says students with disabilities, ages 3 to 21 in high school, that those ages, they are guaranteed access to a free and appropriate education. So that's everybody, no matter your abilities, no matter your skill level, everyone can go to school, to public school. But in college, there is the non-discrimination law. Colleges and universities may not discriminate in recruitment, in admission, or after admission based on a disability. But these are not entitlement laws, so they do not guarantee successful learning or mandate the creation of special programs for persons with disabilities. And the other thing that's different in college, you have to meet the same requirements. So in high school, they take everybody, they have to modify the work, they have to take all, and then in college, you have to meet the same entrance requirements. If you're applying for a degree seeking program, you're required to meet all the same requirements as any other student. So of course you can get accommodations and some disability services, but you're meeting the exact same requirements. And then in high school, school attendance is mandatory. In college, you should attend lectures to maintain your grades, but it's not always mandatory, although a lot of professors do have attendance requirements. So if you have some sort of illness or anything chronic, something chronic that's going to cause you to miss class, it might be something to talk with the Office of Disabilities Services. And then in high school, schools provide services designed to meet students' needs. So it's very individualized. They can modify things. It's in your IEP. In college, they just need to provide reasonable accommodations to provide equal access and participation. But formal special ed services aren't available. And they're not modifying the course content. So they will help you access it, but you are doing the same work in college if you're getting your degree. And then in high school, counties are required to identify students with disabilities through free assessment in the IEP process. But in college, you are actually, the student themselves is responsible for coordinating with the staff and the faculty in order to receive accommodations. So students don't have to tell their professors, and that's mostly because most students going to college are 18 or older. And so they're adults, they get to choose if they would like to disclose their disability or if they get accommodations. Parents are allowed to help. Sometimes you can sign, if your student wants your help, you can actually say, like, they can say, this is my mom or this is my dad, and I want them to be in this meeting with me, or, sign a FERPA type thing. They give you permission to be in a meeting. So it's not unheard of, and some students do take parents to meetings. So don't feel like you can't do that if your student wants your help. Otherwise, you can practice with them and prep them for some of these meetings, but it is the student's ultimate responsibility to get the accommodations. It's not the university's responsibility. And then in high school, school officials monitor students' progress towards their IEP goals, and they communicate openly with the students and parents. In college, there's no formal IEPs. Students are responsible for monitoring their own progress and communicating with their professors, their advisors, or their parents or guardians. So it's up to them to communicate if they need the help. And so that's a big difference. And then depending in high school, depending on the transition needs that are in the IEP, schools often help connect students to community support services in high school. And then in college, students are responsible for making their own connections with school-provided or external support services. And services for adults on the spectrum are often a little more limited, but there is getting to be more and more. And a lot of times the school disability department or Office of Disability Services will have resources for you and help you. And we are going to ask questions at the end. Oh no, I jumped to the end again. Sorry, I keep doing this. Let me go back. Sorry, I'm actually presenting from Canvas, which I am not used to. All right, there we go. High school. Okay, we just talked about this. So that was a pretty big outline of the high school versus the college, and what you can expect in terms of services and supports. And then next, we're going to talk about navigating college accommodations. So, like I said, it will be up to you or you and your student. If you're doing it yourself, it's up to you. If you have a family member or a loved one, or even a friend that you just want to go, they can go with you. And you can, again, let them know, I would like this person to be here during my meeting or whatever it is. But a lot of universities or colleges, it's called Office of Disability Services. Sometimes it'll be called Accessibility Office or Office of Accessibility. So you're going to look for those things at the university or college you're looking at. And a lot of times they will have really helpful information on their website. So, one thing that I see a lot is parents ask, do you have to disclose your disability on the application? And you do not. So, you absolutely do not need to disclose your disability. And the admissions office is very different than the Office of Disability Services. And just like medical needs, your information, your personal disability diagnosis is protected. So they can only tell people that you give them permission to tell. Some people, if there's an essay requirement, some people do like to discuss their disability if that's shaped them in some way, or they want to talk about it in an essay during the application process. That's totally fine, but there is no requirement. And then when you go to the Office of Disability Services, you'll usually have an initial intake meeting and they'll review all your paperwork. They'll see what accommodations you need. They'll talk with you. It's a very simple process in college compared to high school. You just have to make the appointment, go to the appointment, have some documentation, and you'll probably see on your university's website what that is. It could be a past IEP, a past 504, an evaluation. And they just want a documentation that you really have this disability and that you do need extra time on tests or a set of notes or whatever the case may be. Again, students' responsibility to go to the Office of Disability Services. The office might request your high school IEP or 504. They just want to get an idea of the past accommodations. It's not that they're going to adopt the whole thing, but they do want to see proof that you did have some sort of accommodations prior, or a diagnosis. And then students are responsible for utilizing and informing about accommodations. So they're the ones that have to tell the professor. So once the Office of Disability Services has reviewed your paperwork, you can discuss the accommodations that you need. And the next slide, I'm going to talk about what some of those might be. But once you guys have agreed on that, that's it for your whole time at college, unless you go back and ask for something else or you want something to change. But then every single semester, the student has to contact the professor. The Office of Disability Services will also contact them if you ask, but you have to tell them, like, hey, I do want all my accommodations in English. And a lot of times it's a portal. The student will log on. They will click through the portal, say, yes, I want my English professor to know. Yes, I want all these accommodations in English. So whatever the course is, they do that every single semester. And that gives permission for the Office of Disability Services to share your disability information and confirm, yes, this is a student with a disability and they do have all these accommodations. But that's your choice for them to share that information with that course and that professor. So that's a huge, huge difference from high school. And it can be hard for students with exec functioning, ADHD, those kind of things. It's another thing to remember because, it can be challenging for sure, but it's important to know that. And I know of students that didn't want accommodations, like, oh, I don't need this. I don't want to be involved in this in college. I don't want to deal with disability services. But we always suggest getting all your accommodations up front, making an appointment, going to disability services, disclosing your disability just to them. That's all. That's the only people that need to know. And if you never use your accommodations, that's fine. But if you get like a month into a class and it's like, whoa, this is hard, this is a lot of content, and you wish you had accommodations, you can get them like really fast. Otherwise, you're going to start that process from scratch, and accommodations are not retroactive. So you find you're failing or you're struggling in a class, they're not going to go back and be like, oh, it's too late. So you want to have those in place from the get-go would be our recommendation. Even if your student or you yourself, if you're an autistic young adult, if you choose not to use them, that's okay. But there's sort of a safety net if you do need them. Let me see what else. Okay, I talked about that. Oh, that's another thing the student's responsible for. If you have testing accommodations, which are very common to have 1.5 time or yeah, if you have testing time, you book your own exam in the testing center. And a lot of times there are guidelines about that. And it can be anywhere from a few days in advance, and sometimes for finals, schools might ask for 2 or 3 weeks in advance. So you don't want to miss those deadlines and dates to take your test in the testing center. And a lot of universities have their own dedicated testing center with quiet spaces and proctors and all of those things, because you're going to need that if you've got double time and your class is taking it in an hour and 20 minutes and you've got double that. So that's another important difference. And then I will just do this. And then talking about just some examples of college accommodations. So it's really important to understand that the accommodations are used to reduce or eliminate barriers for students with disabilities. The coursework is not modified, and the accommodations are individualized. So that's really important. You're still doing the same work. You have the same due dates. There's no like, oh, I'll do half the math problems or a little bit of a shorter paper. Like a lot of things that some students got to do in high school are not applicable in college. You're still doing all the work. You might just access it in a different way. And excuse me, I'm sorry, I forgot. I have allergies for those of you in Central Texas. I'll be okay though. So let's just look at some of these common accommodations. So access to notes or a note-taking accommodation. There's a lot of great programs that you can record, apps, things like that. For that, I will say that a lot of professors will put their slides on Canvas or like some sort of shared platform. So if it's something up there for all students, that meets your accommodation need as well, if it's just available. If you have, oh yeah, so the access to presentations and slides or notes. Sometimes you can get flexibility with attendance and deadlines. That is occasionally at the professor's discretion. And I will say that trying to get extra time in college is not a great idea for a lot of students because it moves really quickly. And the semester's 16 weeks. So if you have the extra time accommodation and you're turning in assignments later than they're due, the classes moved on, those lectures might build on each other, and you're just probably going to get further and further behind. So what a lot of students do is just take less courses. So instead of taking a full-time load, take 3 courses or 2 courses, and that way you monitor your own workload. And then attendance, I would talk to Office of Disability Studies, especially if you have something like chronic migraines or some other thing that's going to affect your ability to go to class. I would definitely talk with Office of Disability Studies in advance. Maybe permission to move around the class, or you could also just sit in the back and walk around if you're kind of a high energy person. Seating accommodations are often an example of a college accommodation. Testing accommodations, I talked about that, but usually it's extended time, quiet setting, possible use of a calculator. Sometimes that's the professor's choice. And if you had like a documented math disability or something like that, tech accommodations, computer for writing, for spell check, those kind of things. Sometimes if you live in the dorms at some universities, there might be a requirement like this must be a full-time student to live in the dorm. So Office of Disability Studies might approve you to go and live in the dorm with taking just 3 classes instead of 4. So you could be considered a part-time student and still live in the dorm for dorm, those kind of purposes if there's any requirements. And then priority registration, this is a huge one. Sometimes you can get this as accommodations to register first, and sometimes the school will just grant everyone with disability accommodations priority registration. This is really, really helpful. I'll talk a little bit about it later, but there are some difficult professors and there are some really great professors. So you kind of want to research that. And then also sometimes people have preferred class times. You might have a student that wants to sleep really late. You might have someone that's taking ADHD meds that are going to wear off and you're better in the morning. And so that's, just some of the reasons they'll give priority registration to students with disabilities. So that's a really big accommodation to have. And of course, there are many other disability specific accommodations. So this is just a few of them. And then next, we're going to just kind of talk about the supports. And it's really important to learn about all the supports available in your university or college. And don't overlook things that might not seem disability specific. If there's not a program, there might be other things going on, like student success mentoring and some other things. This Ascendere program here is at some schools. And while I think it was initially designed to target sort of first-gen Latin American student or Latino students, they welcome everybody. They have little tutoring and mentoring groups and some really neat stuff. So just take advantage and find out what's actually being offered because it may help your student. And then we'll talk about programs and support services here. So, like I said, it's really important to learn about all the sources of support. I mentioned at the start, there are a lot of autism specific programs right now, and there's starting to be some at university, like more and more each year. We're hearing about more and more stuff for students with degrees, degree seeking students, or even non-degree seeking students. There's both. So find out if there's a specialized program. If there's not, it's still okay. A lot of times people can make it work. At some colleges and universities, there's classes that have supplemental instruction. And at community colleges and at universities, a lot of times that's for classes that students might struggle with. And it's like a group tutoring usually with an aide or kind of professor. I don't know what their actual title is, but some sort of aide or professor assistant who's gone through the course, and they'll mentor and provide study sessions, and they're free that are included. So supplemental instruction can be really helpful. There's tutoring and writing centers. Many universities have peer mentoring. The TRIO program is sort of like a support program as well for first-gen students, but also students with disabilities. Some schools have success coaching, and then the counseling centers at some schools have specialized support groups or autism connection groups and counseling and things like that. And then one thing that some of you know, but many people don't realize, is that Texas Workforce Commission may pay for some tuition, even some housing if you're living more than 15 miles from home, and support services, or like an autism support program. So it's dependent. You have to be getting a degree that leads to a employment goal. So if you've got a degree path and you're like, I want to be an accountant, or I want to be this, or this is what I plan to do, graphic design, whatever it is. I mean, there's a pretty broad range of things. But if you link it to an employment goal and you get started with Texas Workforce Commission, you can get some things paid for. And a lot of you who have used Texas Workforce might be like, we tried that. We'd also, if you have problems, you can email us. We're going to provide our email at the end, but Disability Rights Texas, the client assistance program, can also help if you feel like you're not getting services or having a hard time connecting with Texas Workforce. But it's best to start that as early as possible. You can Google Start My VR. And Texas Workforce Commission, it should come up. So I would really suggest looking at that because it can hugely help pay for all of your extra support services you might need. All right, next. So we're going to talk about factors to consider when selecting a college. Hold on. And a lot of these are going to be the same as neurotypical students that don't have a disability, but you still kind of want to take into a lot of, there's some considerations you're going to want to do. So first of all, really consider the location. So first and most importantly, is it somewhere your student wants to live? Like, is it a small town? Is it a big city? Do they like it? Do they like the feel? Because they're going to spend a lot of time there, right? Sometimes students with autism and disabilities might work on their degree a little slower if you're taking 3 classes a semester. you might be there for a while. You know, you might not, you probably aren't on the 4-year plan, and that's okay, but pick somewhere you like. And then proximity to your home or to a source of support. So this is really important if students have anxiety, autism, things like that. Do they want the parent close by? Or do you have other support people, aunts or family or friends? Is there anyone that could get to the campus if they were really needed? And then think about transportation from school to home. So, is your student driving? Can they get a bus or a train? And of course, these are also things to practice if you're just local in your own town and you're going to community college. How will they get there? Is there Uber? Are they eligible for your disability? If you have like Cap Metro or some sort of public transport, is there a disability program? So just kind of explore the transportation options and then think about how often you or your student will want to travel for visits. And are you comfortable if they go a long way away? Are you comfortable with them riding a bus for 4 hours or flying? Or are they comfortable? Are they a little nervous? So, kind of think about all of that and the cost involved as well, because that gets really pricey if you're traveling back and forth to your student and you're trying to find a hotel or whatever the case. So, location is huge for many reasons. And then another thing to consider about the location, if you are getting services, tuition support, room and board, or anything else from Texas Workforce, they do seem more likely to stick with the Texas colleges. So unless you get in somewhere amazing out of state or you have some other justification for a program or something like that, it does seem like they prefer Texas colleges, but it's still worth meeting with them and talking because it's all individualized at Texas Workforce Commission as well. So other things to think about when you're selecting a college, the availability of specialized programs or other support services, and then readiness for independent living or dorm living. So is your student ready? Are they excited? Are they wanting to do it? So kind of follow their lead. Or is community college a better option for the first or second year? Advantages of community college are they're living at your house usually. So you can see what they're struggling with, if they need help or not. It's a big transition. Like I said, the academic transition is big with the whole with all the, if you've had an IEP and you've had support through high school, it is very different to have to do all the work and turn it in on time when it's due. So it can be a big shock for some students. So those are all things to consider when you're selecting a college and where to go. You might also want to look at the availability of on-campus housing, the cost of rent in the area, and just like all students headed to college, all these things come into play. Like what's the cost for your student if you're paying yourself? What's the cost for your family? And also consider that when you're looking at small, I'm going to talk a little bit about big and small schools, but if you're looking at a small private school and it's very expensive, and it's like a little bit of a stretch, are you also going to end up paying for executive functioning support or tutoring, or is there other services? So keep all those things kind of in mind as you're picking a school. Um, Other things that are important to students are campus culture, safety, the size of the school, what are the class sizes, do they have sports and weekend activities? Are there fun things to do, or does everyone go home on the weekends and your kid's going to be there, especially if they want to make friends and do things? So those are all really important things to think about just for all students, not just students with autism, but they're all things to keep in mind, including like your major, your area of study. Do they have it? Do you think it's a good program? And does your student like it? So lots of things to consider when you're picking a school. And then a few things I want to say about big versus small schools, because sometimes I hear, oh, small schools are better for students with autism. And sometimes they are, but again, it sort of depends on what your student needs, what they want, because big schools do have a lot of advantages. I mean, first of all, there's so many activities, so many clubs, kind of specialized clubs as well. So there's almost always something that your student's going to be able to join or have an interest in. And then big schools often have large tutoring centers. They have things like a math lab and a writing center. and long opening hours. So I know at one big university the math lab is open like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. daily, so there's there's no excuse not to get help, right? So there's a lot of things, a lot of support services that are in place at big schools, and they're there for all students, but your student can access them, and it's good to know about those. And then small schools also can be really good for some students. A lot of times there's consistently small class sizes. They may have a little more access to professors, and they'll see the same students a little more frequently, which could be nice as well. So those are all things to consider. And I will say that at big schools too, you would think you might not have access to professors, but a lot of times they are really helpful. And if students introduce themselves and say, "Hey, I'm John, I emailed you, I have autism," whatever, the professors are really responsive and really supportive. So so don't just pick the small school because you think the professors are going to be more accessible. But there's pros and cons to both. And again, it's just like what's the best fit for your student, really. Um, okay. And then next, we're going to talk about getting ready for college. So when you're actually going, you've picked a school, what to expect. And one thing that's in my little tips is get to know the campus. Like if you're a student and you're watching this, if you get nervous or you get a little anxious, which a lot of people do, all students do, right? Everybody gets a little nervous the first day of school on a big campus. Like, where do you go? What building are you in? Look at Google Maps, walk around the campus. You could even take photos of big landmarks. That on the left is the library at Texas State University. You can see it's huge. It's very hard to miss. So if you have some landmarks in your mind, it's going to be a lot easier to navigate campus if you're brand new to the campus. But that'll just help you feel a little more comfortable knowing where you're going and being prepared. Um, and then we got kind of a lot more tips here on how to prepare. So, first of all, what does the student need to be ready? So, you're going to individualize your preparation. And if you're the student watching this, good job because you're working on self-advocacy already. So, congratulations. And if you're the parent, you can help your student get ready or give suggestions. You can even do these things with them. So probably the biggest thing is you're going to visit the campus. You're going to get accommodations in place well before the classes start. And a lot of the offices of disability services will meet with you online. So if you live in Dallas and you're going to school in Houston, no big deal. I'm sure they'll do a Zoom meeting, but I would recommend going in person to see the campus at least, just so you know. If you're going to live in on-campus housing, put the housing deposit down early, even sometimes before you for sure know you're going. A lot of times they're refundable, but in Texas, there's a dorm shortage at a lot of big universities. So put your housing deposit down early. That'll also ensure if they do have single rooms and you have picked early, a lot of times those dorms are first come, first serve on what your choice is. So you might be able to more easily choose a single room, but it's also something you can talk with Office of Disability Services about your need for a single room. And a lot of times they will grant them depending on the school. And then know how to use the school's portals and platforms. You might even want to create a login doc. College it's very different now than if you're a parent and you went to school like 20, even 30 years ago. Things have really changed. There are portals and platforms for everything. Everything has its own password. It is really not easy. So your student probably might need some support to get started. And if you're a student watching this and you don't have family support, your counselor or a teacher might help you with some of these things. But I would really recommend creating a portal and password and a login doc. And then at the university, learn where important offices are, where to park if if you or your student is driving. There are a lot of rules about parking passes, who can park where, what types of parking pass, otherwise you'll get ticketed and towed. So there are multiple rules about parking, and they're important to know. And then if you're riding the bus or the shuttle, where does it drop off at? How do you find people that can help, which maybe it'll be student services, the counseling center, Office of Disability Services. So kind of have in mind, like, if things go wrong, where can I go? Who can I go to for help? It's just good to know. Figure out where the dining halls are, understand if you have a budget or a meal plan. A lot of times at universities, they'll have a little ID card and you buy a meal plan in advance. And then just kind of learn about anything else that you'll need to use regularly on campus because it's there's a lot. I know I'm covering a lot, but I have seen a lot of students go through this now, and it's sort of overwhelming at the start. And yeah, so it's kind of good to be aware and informed of just potential roadblocks. And then this is important. A lot of textbooks these days are online. And so a lot of universities will build in a fee for your online textbooks. And sometimes in the portals, they're kind of buried. It should be in one place that seems obvious, like textbook, textbook here. And then your professor put it in modules and it's under somewhere else. And just know, just log in, make sure you can find your textbook, make sure you can find your syllabus and where you're turning in assignments. So that's another very different thing about high school versus college is just how all of those things work. And even professor to professor, they don't all do the same thing. So for each class at the start, you probably want to look at all those things. And then I talked earlier about time, like Google calendars or other technology. I know Microsoft Calendar has, there's all kinds of online calendars, but you might want to block time on it's going to take this long to actually get to class, or I should go to the dining hall here between my classes, or appointments, and set alarm reminders on your phone if needed. And then you might even want to set reminders for dorm tasks or other personal tasks and errands. And, things are complicated. A lot of parents I hear like, oh, my kid, if they can't do all this, they shouldn't go to college. But we've seen if you kind of help them, support them, teach them, they're going to start learning where all of this is. So it's not, I wouldn't say, I think things are complicated and it's sort of a whole new world. So the student really may need some support to get started. So if you're a student and you do need help, ask a trusted adult, a school counselor, the college counselors or the success office, student success office may help you get started. So don't feel bad for asking for support or needing support, or as a parent supporting your student, because it is a lot when you start. So it's a lot to transition into. Um, and then I think this is actually my last slide, and then we're going to have some time for questions. But this is college hacks and tips. So probably one of the biggest things that can affect your time when you're in college is your classes, the actual classes that you've registered for, and how they're structured and what your professor is like, right? Because that can really affect everything. You're going there usually twice a week. You're spending a lot of time with that class. So try to register as early as possible to get preferred times and preferred professors. And as I mentioned, if you have disability accommodations, a lot of times you get to register almost as in the very first group of students. And registration starts early in college, like probably like by October. I mean, right now, I'm trying to think, probably in February or March. So, it's this month, I guess, maybe later this month or in early March, registration will open for fall classes. And usually in October, they're registering for the semester that starts in January. So you really want to get in, make sure you've applied, you've got your accommodations in place, and then you can register early. And then there was a House bill, and it's 2504. And it actually required that schools put the syllabus for the class and professor reviews from that school on the school's website. So if you Google your school name or the school initials and HB 2504, it'll pop up the syllabus, the professor. You can usually search by course or you can search by professor name. And those are really, really helpful because you can check the course format. So if you're a student that, like we talked earlier, you might be amazing at test taking. You learn everything, you're good, you don't like projects, you're maybe not going to excel, homework, whatever, but you're a great test taker. That if that's like it's a very test heavy course, that might work really well. If you're not a student that likes tests, you might want to look for a course that has more projects or a paper or homework is considered 20% of your grade or whatever the case may be. So and the other interesting thing about college, like in high school, classes are very similar. Like in your high school, if you had one teacher versus the other, you're doing very similar work. In college, the professors kind of set what they want. So they may be teaching the same material, but one professor has two exams and the other professor has three papers and one exam or stuff, so it can really vary even within the same course content on like how they're evaluating it, and the professor sets that. So that's why you want to look at the syllabus if that's a concern for you. There's a website called Rate My Professor, and students go in there and rate their professor if they would take them again. They write comments, and it's not always accurate. Obviously, sometimes students go in there and you can tell they had a really bad experience and they're really mad. And but you can kind of spot those, but it will give you an overall picture if that professor is like students find that professor kind or helpful or accommodating in some way. It's just kind of good to see some of that feedback. Or if people are like, we had to read 10 chapters in a weekend and then he gave a quiz on all of it on Monday, you're gonna want to, you'll get a picture of what that professor's doing. And then another tip is whatever online platform the college or university is using, learn where the things are. And most importantly, see if you can sync the course calendar to what if you're using an online calendar. So in Canvas, you most definitely can go in and choose like sync it to a calendar, and you can sync all of your due dates to your Google Calendar. I believe you can do it for Microsoft as well. I'm a little more familiar with Google, but even if your professor changes a due date in Canvas, it'll populate in your calendar. So it'll just say like Algebra 1 exam is February 11th or whatever. It'll pop up as a little item in your Google Calendar. So those are really good hacks to have. You don't have to go in and type in all your due dates. I talked about it this a little bit. Google Maps is your friend. If you cannot get to campus, get on Google Maps, look at the satellite images of the buildings, just get familiar if you're nervous or you're a little anxious about getting around. Just even seeing the picture of like the math building or the English building or whatever and where you're going and a general idea can help you a lot getting around that first day of school or that first week of university. If you want to learn more about your professors, most universities do have bios and photos on the website. And sometimes you can see they won a teaching award or they used to be a special education teacher in high school, or, you can just kind of glean some interesting information about them if you are someone that likes to kind of research before you start registering. Also wanted to mention school email. This throws a lot of students off. Almost as soon as you apply, a lot of schools will create a school email for you. And sometimes you don't know that. So as soon as you apply, especially if you've been accepted and you're going, you'll get a school email. You'll have to check it often. They will send important information there, and you'll be responsible for it. So you're going to want to find that out. It could be something you ask Office of Disability Services if that's sort of your first stop, like how do you log in? Where do you get started with that? But you're going to want to just know that. And that's long before you register. You'll have to know that to actually register for courses and a lot of things. Before you even start attending, you will have a school email. So that's really important to know. And then even if you're not a big social media person or you don't like Facebook, most of the universities have a parent Facebook group. And a lot of times it's just run by other parents. But I would recommend joining. You'll learn so much information about dorms, like what are the best dorms? How quickly do they fill up? How do the meal plans work? What are apartments that are nearby the campus, like pros and cons and those kind of things. So a lot of sort of tips from firsthand experience, or at least from the parents' perspective, you can find in a parent Facebook group. So that was my other suggestion. And then I believe that is, oh yeah, I was just going to mention a few things about Autism Society and just our services. So we have a Navigating Autism program. It's individualized guidance for autistic adults and families. We have connection groups, both for autistic adults and parent caregivers. And a lot of these are online, but some are in person. We have some recreation groups for adults, a girls' recreation group, sometimes family events in different places, like our holiday parties. We have education events like this one. We also have education events in Spanish, mostly geared towards parents and caregivers. This education event is under our Seminars Across the Spectrum series. And then we also have an autonomy series, and those are geared specifically to autistic adults. And of course, support people are welcome to watch, but a lot of those things are like disclosing your autism diagnosis at work or self-advocacy or different topics that affect autistic adults. And we get feedback from them in order to create that series. We do a lot of legislative advocacy, federal and state, mostly covering, of course, autism issues and disability issues. And then we have an autism friendly partner program where we will work with businesses and kind of about inclusive hiring and training about autism and how to work with autistic employees, best practices, and things like that. So that's just kind of a little bit about what we do. So if you do need future support, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help. And then let's see. All right. And then I think we're ready for questions. So if you have anything, I know on our Facebook page, we had a Google form if you're watching this live right now. But if we have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Thank you so much, Jackie. That was a great presentation. I had some like questions that we get asked a lot, but I think you cover that. Um, I don't know if you mentioned something about power of attorney. Like I know some parents work on something like that. I don't know from the legal aspect, any recommendation there?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, so a lot of people yeah, a lot of people with college age students get medical power of attorney. And that's for both. I see that commonly for students with and without disabilities, because if your 18-year-old gets in a car wreck and then you're not allowed to talk to them because you don't have permission and all these other things, there's many reasons why you might want to look into that. So that's often what a lot of parents do when their kids are college age, because 18, 19, it's still youngish and you're still, if they get in some big thing happens, they probably want their parents. So that's a good one. And then, of course, there's some people are familiar with supported decision making agreements, but you could send those, like the student could send those and be like, oh, I do want my parent at this, and I have a supported decision making agreement. So you could send that to the school as well. They'll probably still have you sign an official release of information and say, my mom and their name or whatever, my dad, this person can have my information. Um, but yeah, those are two things that I would definitely look at: supported decision making and a medical power of attorney.
Perfect, thank you. We have
Yeah.
a question that says they have an old IEP because they homeschool now. They asking if they have to go back to the school district for a new evaluation before going to college.
I mean, if the IEP is really old, like 4 or 5 years old, I would probably try to get something newer. Because your kid, I mean, what your kid looks like in like third or fourth grade versus what they look like at 18 is very, very different. So they're going to really want to see, like, why do they need those supports? Have they gotten them recently? So even if you're doing like speech or ABA or any kind of therapies, or you have a psychiatrist, they might also be able to write a note. But it's probably a good idea to either have a recent sort of evaluation or school evaluation, or a medical, a neuropsych or something like that, if you really want ironclad sort of disability accommodations. So basically, I wouldn't go in with a really old IEP.
Will they go to the school district or somewhere else
Think
for
school
an
dis- I mean,
evaluation?
the school district honestly should be doing it. So yeah, they could definitely go and request it in writing from the school district, get an evaluation, and yes, they could do it from the school district.
Okay, perfect. Another question, do you have any advice for students who might be struggling to get their accommodations met by the school's accessibility office? What steps can they take?
Hmm. So the experience that I've seen so far with students is that sometimes professors aren't meeting they've got the requirement, the professor's supposed to provide notes, and the professor is not doing it. So a lot of times that's where you would go, is to the Office of Accessibility or Office of Disability Services. And most of the time they're the ones that are your champions, and they will step in for the student and be like, hey, this kiddo has or this student has an accommodation for notes. So I have not seen accessibility offices so far. I mean, it's very different from high school, but mostly the disability services are very supportive. If you're at a university or school and they are not supportive, you could probably reach out to Disability Rights Texas, or go to like the dean or somebody higher, go to someone in your department, speak to a dean about it. And then I guess also make sure you're really asking for something that the college could do. You're not asking for modified work or less work or shortened assignments or anything that's not going to be approved in college. So I would also suggest that too. But I would go to someone higher up at the university or college if the disability services department is not doing their job. I would start there.
Perfect. One last question. Have you run into colleges who refuse to accept students who are under guardianship?
No, because I haven't yet, and I haven't heard about it, but because you're not going to really disclose that information, it's like almost like private information. I mean, it's not on the application. So if you're going through the application process, there's nowhere really that it's going to be asked. And then you might tell the Office of Disability Services, but I don't even know, that doesn't always even come up. Unless you turn it in because you're like, oh, I am their guardian and I want to hear everything that's going on, and you turn in the guardianship, but otherwise they might not even know if you don't disclose it. So I haven't seen any like discrimination as far as that goes.
Thank you. We have a couple of comments on the chat. Kenny says technical schools are great. There's a tag teaching the autism community traits in Colorado, and they have a partnership with Greenleaf and have a place here in Austin.
Yes, that's a good comment. There's a lot. I know today I really focused on the degree seeking aspect of going to college, but there's so many great certificate programs, technical college programs, trades, and there's so much need for those things. So that's a really good, yeah, the college does not have to be for everyone. And I would really encourage everybody to explore just your certificate programs and your technical schools and trade schools, because there's a lot of good options there that can work. Yeah, for sure. Good comment.
Oh, thank you so much. I think this is all we have. There's comments saying that is a really good presentation, and I agree. I think you did a really good job breaking things down. And of course, we can always ask any further questions.
Yes, absolutely. Feel free to email us. We're happy to help. And I hope this, at least people can pause this. And a lot of information to transfer to college, but I'm happy to share, and we're happy to help here at Autism Society as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everybody that joined. And I think we can end
Yeah.
up with this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks everybody. All right, great. Let's see. I'm going to stop recording, and then I don't know if we're still live. We might be still on Facebook. Hold on.
Yes.